All
What
right.
do you use?
I currently, for the last 3.5 years, have used CCI. But what I did notice, and the reason that is because the first year that IT Academy came on board, MOAC, Microsoft Official Academic Curriculum through Wiley, was not a part of the deal. So CCI Learning was a free book, and I didn't have money for curriculum because I had just gotten a new lab with all my money. And so that's what I've been using, and once I got used to it, I just stayed with it. And I've had some pretty good success with it. 3 kids took first in the nation last year, went to the worldwide championship. So I have like 900 certifications. Corton and Blake are my students. And Blake is certified in 3 programs so far. No? Oh, not Excel yet? Okay. And Corton's moving ahead, so he's working on his master. And he just passed the word expert, so tougher test, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk about in this PowerPoint a few things. I'm going to talk to the educators first, just briefly, about the different options that are available for teaching as far as curriculum goes and where you can get your resources from. And then I'm going to talk really very specifically and very detailed about how to certify in an exam. So for your students, there's some really good tips here that don't have anything to do with knowledge of the product. So they have to do with the way you take the exam and what you do when you're inside the exam. So the first thing that we're going to do, educators, if you're not certified, get certified. Super important. Have you taken the exams yourself? Yeah, okay. Because you carry so much more weight with your kids. You can say, you know, I've taken the test, I've certified, I've worked, I know what you're going through, and I know it's difficult. So, okay, next slide. You'll have to keep going because each of them are, there you go. So when you get into what you're going to use to teach with, how do your kids learn? Are they self-motivated? Do they need constant direction? There's several resources on the Moodle. Have you guys been to the Moodle? Go to the next one, would you please?
We started off looking at it and the CCI, but we just kind of started creating some of our own, like.
Because there's so much, it really
so
can confuse you.
Put them into the projects that we were currently doing,
right?
Implementing some of those, those key things that come up in the tests. And
right.
stuff.
The one thing that I will say about CCI Learning is it's perfectly mapped to the exam. It's perfectly mapped to the exam, and there's an appendix at the end of the book that is lined up with your score report that you get at the end of the exam, you know, where it tells you how many % you got, and then it breaks down the skills inside of that and what chapter they're in. So if you struggle with that and you have the CCI book, go to the back of it and look at the matrix, and it'll. MOAC now has a very similar thing, but it isn't the exact replica of the exam score report. And at the end, I'll get on the ed tech and kind of show you where a few things are because I have internet connection now. So the Moodle is loaded with all kinds of things. CCI Learning, Microsoft e-learning used to be really, really dry and hard for the kids to get through, but in May they are going to launch a new platform, and it's going to be much better to work with. And it is not comprehensive enough to help a student certify. So it would just be a supplement to what they're learning if you need to reinforce, or you have a student who's, you know, way out ahead and you don't want them out too far ahead and you want to keep them with you, you could have them in that, reinforcing their learning. North Carolina has graciously made an agreement. I'm sure it was monetary, but they made an agreement with the State Department of Ed, and we have access to all of their projects from a couple of their teachers that have been wildly successful. And so all their lesson plans are there and their projects, and it's just more information for you to filter through. But I personally use their certification review assignments. So when I work through the program and right before I put kids in the test, then I put them through this review assignment and see how well they're doing. And if they're struggling in it, then I didn't either cover something well enough or we went through it too quick, and I can kind of recover it.
Where's that?
On the ed tech at OSPI, there is a folder called North Carolina, and you can open that and it's got all their information in it. The next one is, also in that North Carolina folder are some timed practice assignments. And they say, they mirror the exam. They say like 1 of 20, 2 of 20, 3 of 20, and you give it to the students in an hour to take, and they should work their way through the whole thing. The last resource is the Certiport tests, and since everybody in here has already been in testing, hi, have you been in testing yet? Yes? Okay, excellent.
Oh, in here today?
No, just into Certiport.
Yeah,
okay, perfect. I pre-test my kids, so because the exam banks are free to us in Washington State and not every single high school is on the system right now, there are extra exam banks out there. So I put my kids into the test, the real exam, right off the bat. In a way, hoping that they fail, because A, it humbles them a little. B, there's not so much apprehension about the process. You know, when I'm talking about the test as they're learning, there's not all this fear about the exam because they've already been in there. And C, when they hear me use a phrase, and I work really hard at using phrases that are in the exam, instructional phrases and context phrases, it becomes familiar to them. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw that in the exam. So I pre-test them in that. They're free. Use them, use them, use them. So it's a good deal. Okay, so right prior to starting instruction, you need to set up Certiport. So they'll take their exam, and in order to take an exam, they have to create a profile, which we can skip through this quick because you guys are you're already familiar with the profile situation where a kid goes in and creates a profile. And I do this in one day. I print those instructions on the 5 white screens so that they can read those ahead of time, so that in my 55-minute time period, they come in, they sit down, they log in, and they're up and running. They're familiar with the instructions. Now, the one tip I would take away from this is that I don't know how many of you are handing out your own proctor credentials as student proctor. I created a generic proctor. I called it a dummy proctor. So I went in and created a profile for Kalama High School as the name. So first name is Kalama, last name is high school, and then gave that a password. But I set that up as a proctor. And when you don't want kids to have access, you can just go and check that proctor box in the organization admin tab. And so it's just up on my board. It just has kalama.hs, and then the password is Kalama 2017, and kids go take tests. Yes?
I have a problem with my lab that I have to log in to each computer the kids can take tests.
No, that's what this does.
So they can lock themselves in.
Yes,
So
they
you have
proctor
to use
themselves. And there's a caveat to that. So I make sure that when kids log in, I'm scanning the room that they're all logged in as themselves, and that they haven't logged in as somebody else and are testing for somebody else. Then they check the box that my credentials have been checked, so I've verified that everybody's logged in as themselves. Then they use this generic proctor, and they all log in their login and password at the same time. Is that what you're talking about?
There must be something with permissions in my school, because I literally have to be logged in, and then they can click on take exam, and I can do this. Then they know to do the generic sign in.
Okay, and I can help you with that permission issue. I'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. So we take care of all that in one period, and then we test the next day as this pre-certification test. Again, not many of them will pass, which is a good thing. It's a motivation for them to listen to the instructional material. For you as a teacher, it's an amazing piece of student growth evidence for TPEP. Even if you're only on focused and you're not on comprehensive yet, you're still needing to provide student growth data. And this is one of the best, easiest, fastest ways I know to track student growth, because you can download their fail score and their pass score right into Excel, run a chart, and print it off and be done. Runs your percentages and everything for you. So very powerful tool there. The next thing, when we're during instruction, I'm really careful to teach the context clues. Create, So when you make a document, you know, when you're in the exam or when you're in Word or you're in anywhere else, you double click the new document and it opens, right? In the exam, it does not like that. If it says to create a new document, it wants you to use that button down on the right-hand side that says create. So you would select what document you're going to open and then use the create button instead of double clicking to open the document. Insert proper nouns. So go ahead and hit the next two. Proper nouns are something I teach my kids really, I'm really adamant that they understand this, because this was probably one of my biggest problems in the teaching process in the beginning, was that kids would look at a proper noun like cut out effect, which I should have had the E capitalized, or olive green, accent 3 darker, 25%, and they would try to break that down and take some text that you're supposed to be applying a text effect to, which might have olive green, accent 3 darker, 25%, with 50% shadow on it. Well, then they were trying to break that down and apply olive green to that text and then go into the shadow drop down and apply shadow 50%. But if it's capitalized like this in the middle of a sentence, it's a proper noun and it's a setting. Especially in the core test, it's all about a preset setting. You would never break that down. And so, I don't know, Courtney and Blake, would you say that really helped once you understood that? Yeah, because so many times I would see kids trying to assign those to the text separately.
So if they're together like that, they're usually bolded.
Yep.
Right. Then.
Yep. They're not bolded, but they are capitalized inside the sentence. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have my kids go through the text effects when I'm instructing and say, okay, you've got the next, 2 minutes. I want you to hover over every single text effect so that in your mind you can see what types of text effects are available. Same thing when you're editing an image and you're applying and what's that called, Courtney, when it's got like pencil gray and
the picture formatting.
uh-huh.
I think it's like a tool on the top of the format.
Yeah, it's on the left-hand side. It's an effect.
Yeah.
A picture effect. And they're called all kinds of weird things like pencil grayscale. And so when I'm instructing, I actually have the kids go in and hover over every single one of those so that in their mind they're familiar with, oh, I saw that name. That's a preset selection. Otherwise they're going, pencil gray, what is that? I don't have a color called pencil gray. So I make sure that they go through all of those things. And then make sure that when you're instructing, you're using similar language in the test, which is really hard to do if you haven't tested. So do the next one too. I also am really careful to make sure that they remember what exam they're in. So Blake and Courtney are in the same class. They're in a different period, but Courtney is like, I don't know, Courtney is a whole entire program ahead of everybody else. He's into the expert exam, so those things that I had already taught to him would not necessarily apply, because when you get into the expert exam, it's more about individualistic settings. So I try to make sure they understand that. And then this is the most important thing. There are at least 3-4 ways to do every single thing in Word, and in the business world, I do it the fastest way I can, which is a right click, a keyboard shortcut. The exam will not tolerate that. You won't get points. So you have to do everything in the ribbon. And I was one of those teachers who said, that can't be done in the ribbon. The only way you can do that is right click. Like when you're in the design gallery on the home menu and you're choosing to modify a title or a heading 1 to a different font, we all right click it, right? Do you know how to get there without right clicking yet? Yeah? Yeah. Excellent. That's good. A lot of people don't understand that. And I'm not really sure it covers it in the book, but if you hit the dialogue launcher little arrow, then you can modify it from there. So everything has an action in the ribbon, and that's where you need to be doing it. So no right clicking or shortcut menus. When you have a dialog box open, don't ever red X that box. Always use the close button. And I've got kids who have taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these tests, and this is how they figured out how to get a perfect score. So not that I'm looking for you to get a perfect score, but for every point that you have going for you, you're closer to certification. Yes.
Okay, what book do you use?
I use CCI Learning right now.
So you purchased a physical book?
No, all of
Use
these
it
books are
online?
free. And you're allowed to print the CCI book and the MOAC book.
So those are the ones that are online at ccilearning.com. 2010 ccilearning.com.
Yes. So that's the microsite. That's not the book. And the microsite and the book are different. So if you, and I'll pull up the EdTech site when we're done with here and show you where the books are, because their 2013 books are on there now too. So anyway, these are some basic instructions there. Follow the instructions explicitly. Students are tempted to save a document whenever they make changes to it. Don't do that. If it does not specifically tell you to save the document, don't save the document. Just hit next and move on. Okay, so after we instruct and we're ready to get into the exam, you can use that timed certification review that's on the Moodle in the North Carolina folder if you want to. That is only if you're one of those great big schools that a bunch of people are using the exam base for their classes and you're worried about burning through exams. Otherwise, I would just put them straight into the exam. Remember, only use the ribbon, no right-clicking or shortcut menus, no red X to close the box, and follow the instructions explicitly. Don't close or save if it doesn't tell you to. Now this one, don't highlight extra spaces, is really important because when you have your formatting marks turned on, at the end of a sentence you have that little paragraph symbol that indicates now you're formatting for the next paragraph. And the exam is very touchy about that in 2010. And if you highlight just one space past the end of the sentence, you are now writing code for the next paragraph. Does that make sense? So you have to be really careful with that. And that leads us to taking the test. Now, this is a process that I run in my classroom, and this specific process has given me at least a 30% jump in my certifications. So the first day on Monday we test, and then they write down their questions, but they don't confer with each other. So they're not discussing the exam with each other, they're not discussing the exam with anybody else. I'm the proctor, I know what's in the exam. So they turn those questions in for extra credit, and then the next day I go over and I review every single question with all the students up on the smartboard with generic documents. So I know what they're struggling with, and it would be no different than them getting out of the exam and then coming to me as a teacher later and saying, Ms. Schmidt, I'm struggling with mail merge. I need help with mail merge. Go over all the questions, and Friday I run a final test. Now, I will tell you as an educator, when they go in and take that pre-certification test, and then the way the grading works is that there's 1,000 points available on the test, but it takes 700 to certify. So 700 is an A, and then it moves down from there, and 420 for me is a D. But if they score over 700, I just enter the score and it gives them extra credit. So for these couple of times that they may not have certified or scored a terrible score, it gives them the opportunity to make up for that in the grade portion of it. Does that make sense?
So, sorry, on this one.
No, that's fine.
So this is like a 5-day process?
Yep, 5-day process.
So test and...
Test review, test
Okay,
review,
I'm sorry,
test.
So they don't really have time then to write the questions, do the problem, write the questions, do the problem?
No, they are not allowed to do that.
So
You
they're
cannot write down things when you're in the exam because that would be considered cheating.
Sorry, then I missed that, right? That
So, yep, so they test, 50-minute test, and sometimes I have to write notes for a few of them. And I don't even, they come in, bam, log in, go into the test, and I take attendance while they're testing.
Sure.
And then that last 5 minutes, they have about 5 minutes to write down questions where they can stay after, but the test has closed and is no longer up. And then it's a really good reflective skill for them too, which, does it take some practice, guys?
Yeah.
It takes a serious amount of practice, and I don't let them say to me, well, I just can't remember, do I, Gordon?
So they're writing down the questions that like they struggle with.
They're not writing down specific questions, but they were writing down generic concepts that they're having trouble with. Something that and then I'm able to look at that, and some of them might be more specific, but I'm able to take that and make it a generic skill that I'm showing them the next day.
So, okay, so when you're saying go over all the questions as a class, you're not
Yep.
talking about the questions from the exam?
No. They're turning those papers into the inbox, and then I'm covering what they're struggling with specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're taking like, it's kind of 2 practice tests,
Yep.
and then, okay, sorry.
Yep. No, that's no problem. That's no problem. And then at the end of that week in the system, you know, you can run that test result report, and I dump that into an Excel pivot table and just show the max score, and then that's what I enter out of those 3 tries as their test score. Okay, these are just some questions for you to think about. Does right-clicking really make a difference? Absolutely, yes, it makes a difference. Using the red X, does it make a difference? Yes, absolutely, it makes a difference. It's a score difference. You can go ahead and go through those and they can read them. We were at the worldwide competition last year, and we were able to speak with the Certiport program.